Yo, so today we're going to begin the very long but fun process of tuning the suspension on the S2000. We're going to be figuring out what works, what doesn't, what we like, what we don't like, and we're going to begin that process by installing a very small part that makes a very big difference. So before I get into the unboxing, I seriously just want to take 2 seconds to appreciate the packaging design of this product, man. It is seriously just the coolest thing. This product has its own logo, which is stamped all over the box. It says rigid collar on the side, has its own part number. Not many other companies out there will go as far as this to actually create, like, you know, this type of experience with this product. So big ups to Spoon Sports for being one of the biggest OG manufacturers of performance parts for all Honda platforms. So opening this up, we are greeted by some instructions which are very conveniently in Japanese. I'm gonna pull this styrofoam off for 2 seconds. The finish on these is the absolute craziest thing. The zinc coating applied to them makes them seriously just so beautiful to look at. These are, from what I know, like a one-time use. So if for whatever reason you have to uninstall these, it's recommended that you buy a new set, is pretty much the deal. To think of something as good looking as this as consumable, it's just kind of hard to get your mind around. Okay, so I laid the instructions out and we're gonna talk a little bit about what they are and what they do. In car manufacturing, OEMs create large gaps in clearances between the subframe of the car, which holds the engine and suspension components, to allow for easier and faster production. You can see that on the instructions they actually pasted a little photo of the actual subframe. So the problem with these gaps in clearance is that they actually create play between the subframe and the chassis, and what they do is they allow for kind of undesirable shifting between the two structures, which ultimately makes it impossible to have 100% accurate geometry and alignment setup. Because the two surfaces that are mating aren't perfectly flat, they actually allow for what's known as a spring effect that's created when you force two surfaces together that aren't perfectly flush. So essentially what the collars do is, by acting as a gasket between those two surfaces, they essentially eliminate those gaps in clearance and ensure your subframe is square relative to the chassis of the car, and lock in that positioning, which improves suspension geometry and performance. The other thing that they actually do, which is a big reason that kind of pushed me towards installing them, is they actually reduce a bit of NVH and literally improve ride quality, which I'm really stoked on because the S is a street car for me at the end of the day, and anything that improves ride quality in a day-to-day driving scenario is 100% worth doing in my book. So I got the wheels off the car. I have the two fronts sitting in front of the bumper, and I have the two rears actually underneath the car as kind of an extra measure of safety. So what I want to do is I actually want to start by kind of walking you through the bolt locations for the subframe to kind of give you a better idea as to what we're going to be doing. So in order to install the spoon rigid collars as easily and simply as possible, what we're going to be doing essentially is lowering the subframe. So what that looks like is we're going to be creating a gap here between the subframe, which is sitting here to my right, and the frame of the car. The first location for the subframe bolt is going to be up here. The second one is going to be right there, kind of in the middle, if you can see that, and then the last one is going to be right here. Okay, next we're going to start carefully lowering the front subframe on the car. Alright, just got a couple of turns out of the passenger side bolts in the subframe, so now I'm going to hop over to the driver's side and lower the subframe just a little bit, and the goal is to essentially get it to kind of rock back and forth until I get the gap that I need. So we finally have the right amount of play between the subframe and the chassis to start throwing the collars on, and I'm gonna pull out the first subframe bolt, and as you can see, the subframe doesn't have to be officially removed in order to install these. So first rigid collar is ready for installation. I'm actually gonna ditch the stuff that Spoon Sports provides. See, it's kind of like this jelly material, which I'm just not really familiar with. Hopefully you can kind of see that on camera. I'm sure it would be fine if I threw it on, but I'm just more familiar and confident in a traditional anti-seize lubricant, so that's what we're going to be using. Nice quick coating of anti-seize on this guy as well, front and back. Okay, so now I'm going to try and slip this guy in there, making sure that the slightly larger guy is going towards the bottom. That's the side that goes into the subframe. Okay, cool, there we go. Take a little bit of the anti-seize on this bolt. Kind of just rub it across. Another thing you really want to make sure of is
to hand tighten these bolts to get them started before you zap them with your impact, because the last thing that you want to do is cross thread these guys. Officially done with the passenger side. Now I'm gonna hop over to the driver's side and complete the front subframe. Finally done with the fronts. I'm not gonna lie, it definitely took a little bit longer than expected. I wasn't expecting for the subframe to fight me so much on the way back up. It was pretty challenging to get it realigned in its original bolt hole location. My recommendation would be to be very mindful of how you're zapping each bolt in order to get it to go back up. Because if you hit one corner way too hard or, you know, out of order, then you're gonna misalign the entire operation. It's gonna take twice as long. So definitely be super careful with that. Before you jump into lowering the rear subframe, there are a couple of bolts here on this cross member piece here, this long bar that goes across the passenger and driver side that you want to remove, as well as on that plate on the far side. You want to pull those off because you don't want to be dragging anything down when you go to lower the subframe. I'm going to share a quick fail with you, and hopefully this saves you a little bit of time. So let me go ahead and show you what I did. I actually installed these upside down, and if you look at it from the side view, it's really easy to tell that the outer diameter obviously isn't the same. So what ended up happening is on one of these guys, I deformed the outside of this little rim, so it ended up kind of bending it outwards. So I'm gonna grind that down in a second. This guy, I ended up just smashing in completely. This one was a little bit harder to catch, and it was actually kind of confusing because when this guy is getting installed into the frame, it's hard to tell that it's not really in line with the threads. So that's kind of what you think is happening, but in reality, the collar is just bent, so it stops the bolt from going all the way up and actually reaching the threads inside the frame. So I was able to correct the ovalization on this collar using the tapered edge of a punch. And on this guy, I pretty much just grinded off the deformity, and I think that this was the ticket. So not gonna mess this up a second time. Bam, okay, there you go. I'm gonna slip in the last guy. Okay, there goes that guy. All right, so the bolt isn't long enough to catch the threads, so I'm actually gonna get the car jacked up just a little bit to see if I can push the subframe closer to the frame. So I managed to get all 6 rigid collars on the rear finally installed, so everything has been lubed up. We have all of our bolts threaded by hand, so we can now begin snugging everything down and nut and bolt checking everything. So before we begin nut and bolt checking everything, I'm gonna give you some torque specs. So on the front subframe, the 2 frontmost bolts closest to the engine are gonna be 85 foot-pounds. The rearmost bolt is gonna be 43 foot-pounds. On the rear subframe, the frontmost bolt is gonna be 76 foot-pounds, and the 2 rear bolts are 43 foot-pounds. On the rear tie bar, those bolts are actually 33 foot-pounds as well. Rigid collars are now 100% finally installed, so I'm gonna give you a quick shot of what they look like fully assembled. They should actually be pretty hard to spot, so if we get nice and low, we can kind of just barely see them tucked underneath the frame, just above the subframe. Next thing we're gonna do is throw the wheels back on, and then we're gonna go for our first drive. Finally, the moment we've been waiting for, going for our first drive in the S with the rigid collars installed. Going for a super quick cruise now that we have the collars installed. Not planning on pushing it too hard at all because for one, our alignment is officially thrown off after lowering the subframe, and two, it's pretty peak traffic hour. So what I'm looking for in this road test is just a little bit less feedback from road imperfections. That's something that I'm really sensitive to. Anything that helps make the daily driver experience in this car more livable is something that I can get behind. So that's kind of what I'm sort of fishing around for. Coming up on some slightly bumpy roads, nothing too crazy at all. Oh, here's some road reflectors. Okay, nothing too crazy. There's definitely a little bit less feedback when running over just kind of imperfections in the road, kind of like I was saying earlier. There's like a 10 or 15% difference, to be honest. It's nothing too crazy. Full disclosure, I had rigid collars on my last S2000 and I remember it being a night and day difference, but this time around it's feeling pretty similar. In the meantime, we have a couple of more parts that we have to install before ready for an alignment to really get this car dialed in, but I'm glad that we were able to get a quick before and after with the rigid collars, because I was really curious as to what the difference would be with these. The good thing is that we know that the subframe won't be shifting under load, and we know that the alignment geometry is going to be locked in, so this was still very much worth doing. So with that said, thank you for checking out this video. Thank you for making it this far. If you did, I really hope that you got something from this video. I really hope that you know a little bit more about the rigid collar system and why I think that it's really beneficial for any sports car. With that said, I will catch you in the next one.